Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent.
Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa.
We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south.
Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Ukraine's military intelligence unit claims one of its naval drones destroyed a Russian helicopter and damaged another one in the Black Sea for the very first time. Iran-backed Houthis claim to have targeted Tel Aviv's international airport, a power station near Jerusalem, and an American aircraft carrier hours after Israel said it had shot down a missile launched from Yemen. A South Korean court approves an arrest warrant for the country's suspended president, Yoon Suk-yeol, who was impeached over his short-lived decision to impose martial law early this month. A Philippine-flagged cargo ship sinks off an island in the center of the country, leaving one crew member dead and 2 others missing. 11 people have been rescued. And Mozambique's opposition leader, Venancio Mondlane, calls off protests for 5 days to allow entry of international organizations to investigate alleged human rights abuses by police during the weeks of unrest. Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest from Kenya, where dozens of protesters have been arrested in nationwide clashes with the police. Kenyan police have detained at least 53 unarmed protesters, including an opposition senator, who were protesting against a recent wave of unexplained abductions of government critics. Videos from Kenya's capital, Nairobi, showed that police attempted to break up the sit-in protest by throwing multiple tear gas canisters toward the demonstrators, who were holding chains and chanting slogans against the government.
What we're calling for, what we're demanding is for young people, those who have been abducted, to be released. We have a constitution, we have the rule of law. If there's an issue, call the individual, let them be investigated, arrested. This lifestyle of being abducted should have ended in the 90s. And with our current constitution, as young people, we understand our constitution, and we have every right in terms of freedom of expression and association and gathering.
As the tear gas smoke cleared, police arrived on horseback and detained opposition lawmaker Okiya Omtatah and Reuben Kigame, a blind gospel singer and one-time presidential candidate who had also joined the sit-in protests that were denouncing illegal detentions.
The government of President Ruto stops abducting people. This action is by the government, which is targeting its critics. So this regime has become rogue. And we are here to demand, to call the regime back to order, to demand that the regime follow the rule of law or it vacates office.
In a video broadcast from Omtatah's official X account, he was seen sitting on the ground of what appeared to be a cell with several other men arguing with the armed guards. Now, the protests in Kenya come amid reports of dozens of abductions in recent months. Human rights groups have blamed the extrajudicial arrests on the Kenyan police and intelligence services, At least 82 government critics have allegedly gone missing in Kenya since the anti-government protests erupted in June and July. 7 people have been reportedly missing since the beginning of December. Over the weekend, Kenyan President William Ruto promised to put an end to the abductions that were taking place in the East African country, an apparent climb down from initially calling the disappearances fake news. Though President Ruto did not admit government involvement in several cases of missing people. Instead, he said that parents should better take care of their children. Security forces in the East African nation have been accused of carrying out several illegal detentions, a claim they have constantly denied. The alleged abductions follow a series of anti-government protests that started in June of this year. Initially aimed at overturning the proposed tax hikes, the demonstrations eventually evolved into a movement that cut across Kenya's traditional ethnic divisions, becoming the biggest threat to William Ruto's government.
After the finance protest of June, that is when this started, the crackdown that the government started, when the president went out on national television and said that he's going to go after the people who went to parliament, who invaded parliament. That is when the abductions kicked off.
Now, the alleged abductions have led human rights groups to warn that Kenya was heading back to the dark days of the disappearance of government critics. Abduction and torture of the opposition were common under the administration of the former President Daniel Moi. Scores of protesters have rallied against the alleged abductions in recent days, especially in the prominent cities like Nairobi, Mombasa and Eldoret, carrying images of those who had disappeared and calling for their release.
I am here so that my child can be released. This is my child. I ask the government to please say where he is. I would rather want you kill me. Here I am. Many other people are here too with me. Release our children, please.
A Nairobi court has also ruled this week that the police should immediately and unconditionally free 5 men who were reportedly abducted by unidentified individuals linked to security agencies on the 21st of December. The court ordered the police to either present the 5 men, believed to be critics of William Ruto's government, in the court or explain about their whereabouts. From high taxes to femicides to now abductions, discontent and anger against the William Ruto government has refused to die down throughout the year. As the world heads into 2025, is William Ruto taking Kenya back in time to the days of oppression? Now, to discuss more on this, we have with us Luke Anami, who is a journalist, joining us live from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Alison, and welcome.
Thank you. Now, Luke, what are the key factors that are driving these protests, and why have abductions of government critics become such a contentious issue in Kenya?
There are quite a number of issues. I hope I'm audible enough. There are quite a number of issues that are actually have led to these riots yesterday. First of all, you know, the Kenyans were protesting against the 2024 finance bill that was rejected, and the government decided not to effect it. But the president has actually introduced another bill through what we call finance amendments. And it's one of the trigger of these events. Apart from that, since June 25 this year, when the abductions began, the government has, since the protests began, the government has actually been abducting people, and the number is now on the rise. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, the president acknowledged that there is indeed a kidnapping and this government is going to stop. But that has not actually taken place yet. And that's why you can see people going back to the streets. Yes. The underlying factors, quite a number of them, include a health system that is not working, an education system that is dysfunctional. We are having a high cost of living, high taxes, and quite a number of things. And that's why you see all this is building pressure on the President William Ruto to release the abductees. So far, up to this minute, none of them has been released.
Right. And Luke, on that, how has the Kenyan government responded to these allegations of targeted abductions? And what implications do these incidents have for the country's democratic space and freedom of expression?
Yes, we're having a president who actually has promised to release the abductees, but up to this minute, none of the 6 that were abducted in the last 1 month have been released. And this has very serious implications on the government situation right now, because most people are losing faith. They are losing faith in government. They are losing faith in the institution of the presidency. The only hope that is remaining is the judiciary, which today actually has ordered the government, through a high court decision today, has ordered the government to release the abductees by tomorrow. So we can see that at the moment, there are quite a number of things that are actually beginning to see. People are associating the current dictatorship with that one of President Moi, which is not a very good thing, because after the new constitution, Kenyans are expecting that there's going to be change. There's going to be change in the manner in which they are governed.
Yes.
There's going to be hope. There's going to be, the government is going to listen to the people. It's going to actually improve the living conditions of the people, and also ensure that the youths have employment. But that's not happening at the moment. So it's going to have a huge implication on the political landscape, because as the new year begins, we are going to see new opposition leaders coming up and the new social civil society groups coming up.
Right. On that, what role do these civil society organizations and international actors play in addressing these concerns? And you've touched on it, but in your view, how might these protests influence Kenya's political landscape moving forward?
Yeah. This already is already has an effect on the political landscape, because beginning tomorrow, which is 1st of January, one of the official opposition leaders, Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, has said Kenyans should expect that will actually see the joining of forces of people who are actually not comfortable with President William Ruto's leadership. So already that is going to have an implication. We already also have seen civil society coming together. They are becoming more stronger and more bolder, like those who led the demonstrations yesterday on the street, including the senator for Busia, Okiya Omtatah. And that, again, you can see that the civil society is becoming stronger every day. We are actually getting more energy. They're also getting more supporters from across the country. Right now, the president's regions that voted for him, including the central Kenya, he has lost that support at the moment. And it's not very clear how he will be able to galvanize support from the regions that once voted for him 2-3 years ago. So already that is shaping up to be something very, very serious. Come 2027, when Kenyans expect to go for elections, the ground might be very difficult for William Ruto at the moment.
Absolutely. Luke, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued insights on all that's coming out of Kenya.
Thank you so much.
Let's turn our focus now to Libya, as the North African country remains mired in a civil conflict. A shocking plot by China to increase its influence and tap its energy resources has now been exposed. China allegedly secretly planned to sell military drones to Libya under the pretense of COVID-19 aid. This bombshell revelation has been made in a report by The Telegraph. It brings an international scandal to light, as the plan was reportedly being executed using a web of shell companies in other foreign nations. Since 2014, the oil-rich Libya split under 2 rival administrations. One is the UN-backed administration based in Tripoli. It is led by Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibah. The other is the Benghazi-based Eastern Administration, which is headed by the military general Khalifa Haftar. Now, in 2020, the conflict reached a violent stage when Haftar was attempting to wrest power in a bloody war largely fought with drones. The United Nations banned any direct or indirect arms sale to Libya. However, one nation decided to circumvent this rule, none other than China. As per the Telegraph report, it was during this time that Beijing planned to arm Khalifa Haftar's eastern administration. The report says that China secretly planned to send as many as 92 drones capable of loading multiple missiles to Libya. These drones were reportedly disguised as coronavirus aid and were in direct violation of a United Nations arms embargo. In exchange, Haftar's administration, which controlled almost 90% of Libya's oil fields, would supply barrels of crude oil to China. With this shady deal, China hoped to end the country's civil war quickly, because it would have then allowed Beijing to cement its foothold in future trade with the oil-rich country. The report also details a very complex web of shell companies that were helping China to execute its plan. It says 3 employees of the International Civil Aviation Organization, or the ICAO, a UN agency in Canada's Montreal, were a part of the plan. Now, these 3 employees allegedly negotiated the drones for oil deal. As a part of the secret deal, the Chinese Wing Loon drones were to be sent to Libya. Then crude oil from Libya was to be sold to China at a discount. To hide the illicit transactions, a shell company registered in the UK with a Chinese director was a part of the scheme. Now, other shell firms in Egypt and Tunisia were also involved. As per the report, these entities could have been used by China to avoid sanctions and bans by covering up international payments and transfers. All these details have now emerged as a part of an ongoing investigation in Canada. In April, 2 ICAO employees were charged on suspicion of participating in the conspiracy. As per reports, the Chinese representative with whom these men were negotiating the deal appeared to have direct communications with the Chinese Foreign Ministry. A Chinese firm interested in the deal was also seemingly directly tied to the family of Xi Jinping, the country's president. But this is not the only deal that possibly took place. Now, in June of this year, the Italian authorities seized Chinese drone parts that were disguised as wind turbine equipment bound for Libya. All of this suggests that China, which is already the world's largest exporter of drones, may be sending far more weapons to Africa in secret. And shifting focus to the Horn of Africa, where a chilling road accident in Ethiopia has claimed the lives of several people. At least 71 people have died in southern Ethiopia after a truck carrying a wedding party plunged into a river on Sunday. Local authorities have said that the death toll from the accident so far included 68 men and 3 women, with only 5 people surviving the deadly road accident. Now, the truck careered into the water in the Bono district of Sidama State, which is some 300 kilometers south of Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Authorities said that the driver had lost control of the freight truck when trying to turn a tight bend ahead of a bridge. The truck was reportedly carrying about 76 people, including those headed for a wedding and day laborers. But authorities say that the accident could also be due to the truck carrying more people, as there were scarce a number of passenger vehicles that were operating on the day in the region. Now, visuals from the scene showed that the front of the truck was completely crushed due to the impact of the big stones in the river. Blurred images shared on social media platform Facebook by the State Health Bureau showed a group of people attempting to pull a damaged vehicle from the river, and other images shared by the Bureau also appeared to show bodies, some covered in blue tarpaulin, lying on the ground. Eyewitnesses of the accident said that the people, most of whom were dressed in suits and dancing to blasting music, lost their lives as the truck oversped.
The incident happened yesterday afternoon around 4:50 p.m. It was a truck that was going from Murd village to Wayo carrying over 71 people. They were going to a wedding. All the 71 people on board have lost their lives as a result of speeding. It went straight to the river. Men and women, nobody survived. Most of the bodies didn't even have complete body parts. It would have been better if all the corpses were intact. I was here at the time. We collected the bodies of men and women and loaded them onto a car.
Now, road accidents are a common phenomenon in Ethiopia, Africa's second most populous nation. The country reportedly records around 26 road deaths per 100,000 people each year, while the United Nations says higher-income countries have an average of around 8 road traffic deaths per 100,000 people. Several factors, such as poorly maintained roads, old vehicles, overspeeding, drunk driving, and weak laws on road safety, have contributed to the rising road accidents in Ethiopia. In addition to the accident in the Sidama state earlier this week, several similar incidents have occurred in Ethiopia in recent years. In September of 2024, a bus swerved into a river in southern Ethiopia in Walaita, leaving at least 28 people dead and 19 others seriously injured. In another incident, about 18 civilians were reportedly killed in October of 2018 when an army truck crashed into a minibus in the country's northern state of Amhara. In the same state, in 2006, about 17 people were killed and 36 others were injured when a passenger bus plunged into a deep ravine. So, with several innocent Ethiopians losing their lives to road accidents each year, the latest incident comes as a warning and a stark reminder to the authorities to build better infrastructure, implement stringent road safety laws, and raise awareness among its citizens. Now on to our last story. Africa, once known as the cradle of humankind, today is seen as the land of the future. Rich in both natural and human resources, in the past few years, the region has turned into a hotspot of geopolitical rivalry between world powers. It is one of the fastest-growing regions in the world, and this year, too, it has managed to maintain its growth momentum. But not without challenges. From military takeovers to the rise of the youth, from worsening debt to the tectonic political shifts, 2024 has been a mixed bag for the continent of Africa. Our next report brings you the 5 biggest headlines from the continent this year.
Africa, the second largest continent, home to over 1.5 billion people. Best known for its enormous diversity and the richest wildlife. In recent years, Africa has transformed itself into one of the fastest growing regions in the world. And throughout the year, it has managed to maintain that growth momentum. Despite facing multiple shocks, Africa's economy has largely remained resilient. The region has also emerged as a major hotspot of geopolitical rivalry between the big economies. 2024 has been a mixed bag for Africa, from elections to political instability. From multiple summits that put Africa on the world stage to global security challenges. From rising debt to worsening conflicts. It has been a year of cautious hope, to say the least. Let's take a look at the 5 biggest headlines from Africa in the year 2024. Starting with a few facts. Did you know that 7 in 10 Africans are under the age of 30? The continent has a median age of 19, the youngest in the world. And these young Africans have been on the march. It has been a year of youth-led protests across the continent. The young ones made sure they put their aging leaders on notice. Their message was clear: change or go. It all started with Kenya. In June, the country's Gen Z set an example for the entire world as they poured out onto the streets in massive numbers, demanding that the William Ruto government withdraw a finance bill. This included a slew of higher taxes. And it's not just the bill, they wanted the president to go as well. Key Kenyan cities turned into war zones. The sound of bullets echoed in the streets that were engulfed in smoke from tear gas shells. The protesters even stormed the parliament. The Kenyan security forces unleashed a fierce crackdown, but the protesters did not flinch. President William Ruto was eventually forced to give in. He succumbed to public pressure and yielded to some demands made by the people.
I concede, and therefore I will not sign the 2024 finance bill.
But the anger did not let up. The Ruto government continues to be on thin ice. Emboldened by Kenya, young demonstrators in neighboring Uganda used social media to organize an anti-corruption protest. Despite police excesses, dozens marched in the capital Kampala. They told President Yoweri Museveni that he was messing with the wrong generation. More than 70 activists were arrested in Uganda. Gen Z from Kenya and Uganda in East Africa became an inspiration for the youth in West Africa's Nigeria. In August, the Nigerian youth in Abuja and Lagos protested against poor governance under the Bola Tinubu administration and the worsening cost of living crisis. But Nigerian authorities managed to crush these protests within days. The protesters were met with mass arrests and a fierce crackdown. Dozens were charged with treason and inciting a military coup. The second big headline: rejection of liberation-era parties. Africa's spirited young population also led a political revolution. Southern Africa witnessed a disruption of the grand old liberation-era parties. These are the parties that had been relying on their goodwill of fighting colonialism to stay in power. But for the young Africans, that goodwill and a history lesson played on loop weren't enough. Jobs, accountability, freedom of speech, human rights. They want their governments to deliver. First, it was South Africa. The continent's powerhouse voted in its general elections in the month of May, and the result brought a seismic shift in the country's political landscape. The ruling African National Congress, which was once led by Nelson Mandela, lost its majority for the first time since the end of apartheid 3 decades ago. It was brought down to 40% of the vote, and it was forced to form a coalition government with a leading opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. This party has long been perceived as one that promotes the interests of white South Africans. In diamond-rich Botswana, voters rejected the ruling Botswana Democratic Party after 58 years in power. The BDP has been in power since the country's independence in 1966. Come 2024, the party bagged only 4 parliamentary seats. Poor economic growth and high unemployment dented the grand old party's popularity. In Mozambique, though the ruling Frelimo party won the re-election, extending its 49-year rule, a staggering 56% of the 17 million eligible voters abstained. The results have been widely disputed. The October election results have fueled intense clashes between the police and protesters. A large part of the country's youth supported the independent opposition candidate Venancio Mondlane, who claims that the vote was rigged. He called for nationwide protests, but the demonstrations were met with tear gas and live ammunition. At least 260 people, including children, have been killed in the protests against the disputed results. The West must go. This has been the slogan of the hour in West Africa, especially in the junta-ruled states. And this is the third biggest headline of the year from Africa. On September 15th, the United States completed its military withdrawal from Niger. The decision was not Washington's, but Niamey's. Following the footsteps of neighboring junta-ruled states like Burkina Faso and Mali, Niger too gave the boot to the West. In March of this year, Washington was asked to withdraw all its troops from Niger. Earlier, France had been asked to withdraw from its former colonies Mali and Burkina Faso. The French forces completed their withdrawal from Mali on August 15th. Burkina Faso had already given them a one-month ultimatum at the end of 2023. The United States increased its military footprint in Africa after the September 11th attacks to fight Islamist terrorism. Whereas France, the former colonial power of many African countries, continued to enjoy trust to tackle security and other challenges. Military bases in the Sahel region helped the West conduct intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance activities. But after the juntas took over in West Africa's Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, they asked the West to withdraw their troops. Even Chad has reportedly requested a US troop withdrawal. The Sahel has had a reputation for long-running insurgencies. The junta leaders said that over the years, the West failed to counter this challenge and did little to improve the security situation. This massive snub by West Africa has almost led to the collapse of Western influence in the Sahel region. This extends from the Atlantic coast of Africa to the Red Sea. But as the security situation continues to deteriorate, the junta rulers of West Africa have turned to a new partner, Russia. The anti-West movement quickly turned into a pro-Russia wave. Russian flags were proudly displayed during protests against the French and US forces. Challenging the Western hegemony, Russia sought strategic partnerships in the Sahel region. Moscow expanded its footprint through its Wagner mercenary group, which was later disbanded and renamed the Africa Corps. It has solidified partnerships and expanded engagement in military, security, and diplomatic initiatives. This further diminishes the West's future in West Africa. The fourth biggest headline from Africa this year is Sudan Civil War and the role of outsiders. The Northeast African nation has been devastated by an unrelenting war since April 2023. On one side, you have Sudan's army, headed by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. On the other side, you have the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, headed by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. Both sides have refused to back down. The United Nations has repeatedly accused foreign players of prolonging the war in Sudan, making it harder for the country to find peace. Several countries have been supporting the two warring parties with arms, ammunition, and finance. The countries include the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and Libya. All of them have been accused of supporting the paramilitary RSF. Meanwhile, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Iran reportedly aid the Sudanese army. This violates a UN arms embargo against Sudan. So, how are these arms entering Sudan and reaching the warring parties? Sudan is surrounded by major arms trafficking hubs. Weapons and ammunition are smuggled in through countries like Libya, Chad, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, and Uganda. But it is the United Arab Emirates that has emerged as the foreign player most invested in the war. A United Nations team tasked with monitoring an arms embargo on Darfur backed allegations that the UAE was funneling weapons to the RSF through Chad. Abu Dhabi has, however, denied all allegations, calling them ludicrous. While the war trade continues to boom, the humanitarian situation in Sudan is worsening with each passing day. The international community has been failing to address it. The civil war is inching closer to its 2-year mark. Sudan has become the center of one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. Over 20,000 people have been killed, around 9 million have been displaced, and around 25 million, which is almost half the population of Sudan, are in dire need of humanitarian aid. And still, the prospects for peace remain elusive. The fifth headline from Africa comes all the way from Equatorial Guinea. It's a small nation on the west coast of Central Africa. This made big headlines around the world over a high-profile sex tape scandal. In November, over 400 sex tapes involving a high-ranking Equatorial Guinean civil servant made rounds on social media. The scandal surrounded Baltazar Ebang Engonga, the director of the country's National Financial Investigation Agency. Authorities found around 400 sex videos of him and multiple women on his computer. This included his brother's wife, the president's cousin and sister, the wife of the Director General of Police, and the spouses of over 20 ministers. Engonga's office was the site of many of these sexual encounters. It's not clear if the sexual activities with the women were consensual, or if any of the women had lodged formal complaints against him. Some reports say that these scenes were filmed without consent. Some of the videos were leaked on social media, prompting shock and outrage across the country. The sheer size and the profiles of the people involved pushed the government into hysteria. The president, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, who has been ruling Equatorial Guinea since 1982, panicked as well. The government swung into action to curb the spread of the videos. First, they cut down the internet. Then, Engonga was suspended while a probe of the scandal continued. The government also said that all those appearing in the sex tapes would be suspended. Those responsible for securing the buildings in which the videos were allegedly filmed would be reprimanded for failing to do their jobs. The government also ordered a crackdown on sex in government offices. It decided to install security cameras in all offices and stepped up security. While scandals like this, involving politicians and high-profile officials, have emerged before, this case in Equatorial Guinea was one of the biggest incidents to shake the world.